This brings us then to the second prophecy, or the second labor of Hercules, which is the killing of the multi-headed Lernaean Hydra. Within the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Hydra is said to have had 7 heads. It is commonly agreed that Gilgamesh himself represents the same figure as Hercules. The 7-headed dragon apparently represents the same dragon which the Apostle John imagines as appearing in heaven, each head having some sort of crown. We read in the book of Revelation, chapter 12 and verse 3, "And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads." It was Hercules' task to slay this dragon. However, there was one thing peculiar about this particular beast that seemed to make it almost invincible. Each time Hercules would cut off one of the heads of this dragon, 2 more heads would grow up in its place. After retreating to a safer area, being himself out of the range of the dragon's reach, Hercules began to study the dragon in an attempt to determine an approach by which he might defeat the monster. Upon studying the dragon's heads closer, Hercules had noticed that the one he'd seemed somewhat different from the others. Hercules had figured out that this peculiar head of the dragon must be the chief head, and that it was this head that gave life to the dragon. The head itself was immortal. However, it appeared to Hercules that it just might be possible to detach this head from the dragon's body. Now, John also alludes to the peculiar nature of this 7th head, which, although it receives a mortal wound, will revive again back to life to be yet an 8th, while still, of course, being one of the original 7, turning to Revelation chapter 17, verse 11. We can read, "And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th and is of the 7, and goeth into perdition. Having already successfully decapitated the head from the beast, the head itself still appeared to be very much alive. Since he could not kill the head, Hercules buried the head alive under a heavy rock while it was still hissing. That head being now removed from the dragon's body, allowed Hercules to cut off each of the other heads one at a time and cauterize their necks with his blazing torch. He reasoned that this would prevent the growth of any further heads from springing up upon the beast." Eventually, this dragon was defeated. The head had to be buried under the earth before the dragon itself could be defeated and rendered powerless. The star located in the right elbow of Hercules has been named Marsic, meaning the wounding. The Apostle John speaks of this dragon being also buried under the earth for a 1,000-year period, after which the dragon must again be loosed upon the earth for a little season. Both of these incidences apparently attempt to suggest the same fate. It is interesting that the dragon's immortality appears to be a matter of significant importance within both of these accounts. This second prophecy or task of Hercules, although concerned with the wounding and breaking of the serpent's head, seems to focus more upon the immortality of this one peculiar head, which is somehow different than the others. In our picture of this constellation, we see only one head upon the Hydra, regardless of how many heads grow upon the beast. There is only one Satan and one adversary against man. All others are obviously under his direct command. We now note that it is written in Revelation chapter 20 in verses 2 and 3, "And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years, and cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled, and after that he must be loosed a little season." Throughout the many ancient religions and myths, there are many so-called gods, but we need not think of them as many, but as one. The many-headed dragon was said to have had the gift of diverse tongues, and throughout the world, in many nations, the dragon speaks a different religious tongue, spewing forth his various myths and superstitions, but we must not forget that it is the same dragon. In the Battle of Hercules, the number of heads had increased from 7 to at least 100 before Hercules had realized how he might finally kill it. As we have shown already throughout this book, many of these so-called gods, although they have different names and different faces, all seem to represent the same story. story, that is, of course, with minor variations, we must understand that Satan has skillfully invented many such myths in an attempt to confuse the nations and to eternally hide the truth from them. Satan, not being able to remove the truth from the world concerning these great signs, had attempted to mask the truth through the invention of these many religious myths throughout the world. One can certainly imagine how that each time the Greeks would preach Hercules, or the Egyptians would preach Osiris, or the Queen of Heaven was proclaimed, Satan would rejoice, thinking that his clever false prophecies were winning over the truth. But he had no way of knowing that Jesus Christ would come forth to fulfill the very prophecies which his false religious systems had been proclaiming. By fulfilling the many prophecies hidden within the ancient myths, Jesus has cut the hide of the Nemean lion with his own claws and afterwards used it to further his victories. Though there be thousands and thousands of different myths spoken in different tongues throughout the earth, this mythological dragon has been defeated by one swift blow. By fulfilling the prophecies himself, Jesus has decapitated the dragon of the myths. These myths no longer have any power to confuse the gospel or compete against the gospel of Jesus Christ, but instead they testify to the truth of the gospel. It is as if a messenger is flying through the midst of the heavens, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth. And this gospel is taught and preached in every nation and kindred and tongue and people. And what does the messenger say? Fear God, for he exists. Give glory to him while you can, for the hour of his judgment is soon at hand. He is the creator who made the heaven and the earth and the sea. The confusion of Babylon's many tongues has now been silenced. For Babylon is fallen, the same Babylon who made the nations drunk with her spiritual fornication now has no more power to deceive. No matter how we slice it and dice it, God is glorified when the truth of these signs has finally been realized and understood. When we examine Revelation chapter 14, verse 6 through 8, we see another interesting revelation or secret knowledge concerning Babylon. And I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people, saying with a loud voice, Fear God, and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him that made heaven and earth and the sea and the fountains of waters. And there followed another angel, saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. This leads us then to third prophecy or task of Hercules. That task was to catch the Cernian hind that had the golden horns. This particular creature is said to have ravaged the fields continually and could not be tamed by any man. According to the Irish mystical tradition, the pursuit of the hind is said to have represented the endless pursuit of wisdom. Within the Greek myth, it is taught that only after an intense struggle that consisted of tracking and chasing down this hind, Hercules had finally subdued the creature without harming it. Evidently, as a direct result of his great success in this endeavor, Hercules became known as Melon, meaning apples, and apples were continually offered to him as a symbol of his great wisdom. In 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 19, we read, For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God, for it is written, He taketh the wise in their own craftiness. The Messiah, when he came forth into the earth, would have to prove his wisdom to be far superior to the wisdom of his evil opponent. We have already demonstrated how, by the fulfillment of the prophecies within these ancient myths, he wrapped himself up in the glory of the heavens, a thing that Satan would never have expected. Because he is the Jewish Messiah, many still worship Christ on the Sabbath or seventh day. But besides this, he arose from the dead on the day of the sun. By doing this, he has stolen away Sunday worship from the devil as well. Anciently, the cross everywhere was regarded as a symbol that represented many of the false gods. By dying upon that cross, he stole the cross from paganism as his very own monogram. The Saturnalia was stolen from the pagans and now gives him glory by honoring the birth of Christ. The 40 days of weeping for Tammuz now becomes the 40 days of temptation in the desert, giving Christ the glory. Easter, a day that once was uttered in the worship of the Queen of Heaven has now been given a new meaning. Today, Easter is synonymous with the day of his resurrection from the dead. Even the pagan day, Halloween, has been captured by the Church as a day to remember the beginnings of the great Protestant Reformation. Such is the wisdom of our God, and although many might indeed object to the customs, those who practice such things are free to do so because they have been set free from such bondage either way. In Colossians chapter 2, verse 15, we read, "And having spoiled principalities and powers, he made a show of them openly, triumphing over them in it." As Corinthians speaks of the mystery of wisdom in chapter 2, verse 7 and 8. But we speak the wisdom of God in a mystery, even the hidden wisdom, which God ordained before the world unto our glory, which none of the princes of this world knew. For had they known it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. The Messiah who was to come forth into the earth must prove himself beyond question to be the wisest of all men. When we look to the gospel of Jesus Christ, we discover that it is the simple preaching of the cross of Christ which has succeeded in destroying the wisdom of even the wisest of men. Though the wisdom that is found within the gospel is far superior to that which may be found in any other book, the wise of this world think of it as mere foolishness. This salvation plan of Christ is of the utmost perfection. The plan or scheme was so wise, in fact, that it enabled the overturning of Satan's own wisdom against himself. He who had no equal, the wisest of all creatures, has become a mere pawn in this marvelous and strategic game of salvation. There are no flaws in the masterpiece wrought by the Son of God. There is no need for revisions. In one simple sacrificial offering of his own life, he has abolished the law against man's mind, the curse against his body, the sin against his spirit, the death against his soul, and has completely and thoroughly humiliated his opponent. In one covenant meal, he has supplied every need of the physical man and joined himself forever in spirit and nature to that man, causing him to be exalted to the status just beneath God himself. Christ himself describes that work as being finished. Not one jot to add or one tittle to remove. To add or remove anything to the finished work of Christ would cause it to become something less than perfect. The scriptures in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verses 18 through 25 then expounds upon this great hidden wisdom of the Almighty God. For the preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness, but unto us which are saved it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and will bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent. Where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this world? Hath not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? For after that, in the wisdom of God, the world by wisdom knew not God. It pleased God by the foolishness of preaching to save them that believe. For the Jews require a sign, and the Greeks seek after wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified, unto the Jews a stumbling block, and unto the Greeks foolishness. But unto them which are called both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God, and the wisdom of God. Because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. The fourth prophecy was to capture the Erymanthian boar alive, and bind him in chains. The boar was a very significant symbol within the ancient myths, as it was especially associated with the Saturnalia. The actual ritual of offering up the boar as a sacrifice to Bacchus, Osiris, and Venus, Aphrodite, had to do with the capturing of the boar alive so that justice might be served. Adonis, Bacchus, had been the young lover of Aphrodite who was murdered by the wild boar. This became the central theme of the ancient myths, how that this beloved son was torn apart by this wild boar, but afterwards the son arose back from the dead to enjoy a new life. This boar was especially connected with that period known throughout the earth as the 40 days of weeping for Tammuz, which we can clearly see in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 8 and verse 14. So the boar is the enemy of the Lord of all the earth. The very one who had caused his death, and having been raised from the dead, is captured alive to be handed up to the courts of heaven, that justice might be served. The goddess Aphrodite Almighty demanded that this boar be captured and brought before her, being bound in chains. Does this say anything to the church of Jesus Christ? To the church, the command has been given conclusively that we go forth throughout the earth, binding up the enemy and casting him out as often as the opportunity presents itself. If this was not the case, why then has the church been given the authority to tread upon serpents and scorpions and upon all the power of the enemy, as is clearly revealed in the Gospel of Luke chapter 10 and verse 19, as well as the Gospel of Matthew chapter 18 verses 18 through 20? It is sad to say that we have often fallen far short from carrying out this command. For a reference, we can review the Gospel of John chapter 14 and verse 12 through 13. The Scriptures show us how that Christ will bind Satan up in a prison underneath the earth in Revelation chapter 20 verses 1 through 3. Note also the great chain that he uses to bind the strong enemy of heaven and earth. There he remains, bound in chains to await his day of judgment. Clearly we read in Revelation then, "And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years, and cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled, and after that he must be loosed a little season." In Egypt, the boar had represented the great enemy Set, who had murdered his brother Osiris. In this myth, then, Hercules is none other than the sun god Horus, who is coming forth to avenge the death of his father. It was prophesied of old that the Messiah was to come forth to avenge the blood of his father. Set, Satan, had murdered Osiris, Adam, and stripped him of his kingdom upon this earth. This Messiah, who is also the mighty incarnation of God, was to come forth to reclaim the lost throne, as well as to avenge the blood of Osiris. Within the Bible, we see many references to the responsibility of the blood avenger. Such responsibilities include redeeming lost possessions, redeeming kin who have somehow been sold into slavery, and avenging the murder of the innocent, for the sole purpose and intent of balancing the blood account. If thy brother be waxen poor, and hath sold away some of his possession, and if any of his kin come to redeem it, then shall he redeem that which his brother sold. After that he is sold, he may be redeemed again. One of his brethren may redeem him. The revenger of blood himself shall slay the murderer. When he meeteth him, he shall slay him. We can readily see that the ancients had understood that the Messiah, when he comes, would come to avenge the death of Adam. His primary role or purpose was to be the blood avenger. Satan had murdered Adam and had stripped him of his kingdom upon this earth. This great and mighty one would come forth one day into this earth to reclaim the throne of his father Adam and to hunt down that evil one who took the innocent life of his father. This then is that great story that we find repeated over and over throughout these ancient myths. It was during this fourth labor of Hercules, while standing against the centaurs in battle, his faithful friend Cheiron by his side, that his faithful friend was wounded in the foot, ankle, or knee by the poison arrow of Hercules. After Hercules had fought and slew the great Hydra monster, he had dipped the heads of his arrow in the poisonous blood of the serpent. One of these arrows had accidentally fallen out of his quiver and had landed upon his old friend Cheiron. This mighty man, whom we see within the heavens, was not always called by the name Hercules, but was anciently referred to as simply the Kneeling One. Aratus, the Greek poet, wrote in his days that none knew his name or what it was at which he labored. Near this, and like a toiling man, revolve as a form. Of it can no one clearly speak, nor what he labors at. They call him simply the man up on his knees in desperate struggle. Like one who sinks, he seems. From both his shoulders, his arms are high uplifted and outstretched as far as he can reach, and his right foot is planted on the coiled dragon's head. This was considered to be a great mystery, and although many have attempted to understand the mystery, it was never quite understood completely. But we speak the wisdom of God in a mystery, even the hidden wisdom, which God ordained before the world unto our glory, which none of the princes of this world knew. For had they known it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. Now we come to the fifth prophecy or labor of Hercules. That task was to clean the filthy cattle yard belonging to Augeas in one day. The flocks and herds of Augeas were immune to any kind of disease. These cattle left behind great mountains of dung that had just about covered the entire land. Although the filth did not seem to affect the health of his flock, it did apparently begin to cause serious pestilence across the land of Peloponnese as well as throughout some of the neighboring lands. This pestilence was accompanied by great famine, which might be expected due to the great depths of dung that had accumulated in the valleys. No person could plow the pastures to allow grain to grow. Hercules was faced with the task of somehow cleansing the entire land of pestilence, disease, and famine. From a purely spiritually perspective, the Messiah's great task would concern the great mounds of spiritual dung that saturated the entire earth, preventing the growth of the good seed of God. Satan and his demons are evidently immune to the great sickness, pestilence, and disease, which almost completely consumes every living inhabitant upon this earth. It is because of his spreading of his spiritual dung upon this earth that the inhabitants seemingly have no good spiritual food to eat. Few seem to realize that there is indeed a severe famine upon this earth, but we, of course, are alluding not to physical food, but that of the Spirit. Behold, the days come, saith the Lord God, that I will send a famine in the land, not a famine of bread, nor a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of the Lord. And they shall wander from sea to sea, and from the north even to the east. They shall run to and fro to seek the word of the Lord, and shall not find it. Within the space of only one day, this Messiah was to devise a plan that would remove the iniquity of this planet, ridding it of all its sickness and disease. To accomplish this great feat, Hercules had divided the two great rivers, Alpheus and Menneus, causing the waters to flow throughout the land. The cleansing force of these rushing waters had completely removed the dung from the land. The land was now said to be free to be used by the inhabitants for agriculture, and all the pestilence had been completely removed by this cleansing act, thereby ridding the land of the cause of their sicknesses and diseases. It is interesting that Jesus has also cleansed the entire world by the flowing of the two rivers that poured forth from his pierced body, the river of water and the river of blood. Within one short day, Jesus Christ, as prophesied in this myth of Hercules, had successfully removed the iniquity of the inhabitants, as well as all sickness and disease from off the earth. Although we do not yet see this great salvation with our physical eyes, we do understand that this is the very essence and heart of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now we come to the sixth prophecy or labor of Hercules, which was to remove the brazen-clawed, brazen-winged, man-eating fever demons from the Stymphalian marsh. These demonic creatures had beaks that were strong enough to pierce a metal breastplate and were believed to be the main cause of fever. It is said that they would come upon man and suck the very life force out of them. Although Hercules shot many of them down with his bow, there were many others that he simply caused to relocate out of the land. The myth indicates that the Messiah was to have power over such demon spirits, having power to destroy as well as to command. His task is clear: to remove these demons out of the land and set mankind free from their torment. While upon the earth, Jesus had often confronted various demonic spirits, thereby demonstrating that he had power over them all. He did not need a physical bow to accomplish this task, for his bow was the lips of his mouth, and as arrows shooting forth from a bow, his words shot forth from his lips, piercing these demonic creatures at the center of their innermost being, who whet their tongue like a sword and bend their bows to shoot their arrows, even bitter words. Thine arrows are sharp in the heart of the king's enemies, whereby the people fall under thee. They were rendered harmless and made to flee at his very command. And in the synagogue there was a man which had a spirit of an unclean devil, and cried out with a loud voice, saying, Let us alone. What have we to do with thee, thou Jesus of Nazareth? Art thou come to destroy us? I know thee who thou art, the Holy One of God. And Jesus rebuked him, saying, Hold thy peace, and come out of him. And when the devil had thrown him in the midst, he came out of him, and hurt him not. And they were all amazed, and spake among themselves, saying, What a word is this? For with authority and power he commandeth the unclean spirits, and they come out. This now brings us to the seventh prophecy, or labor of Hercules. This seventh task included the capture of the Cretan bull who had sired the famed Minotaur. In the mythology of the Persians, the god-man Mithra also battles and eventually subdues the primeval bull. This bull caused much damage and was a great threat to the inhabitants of the land. And Hercules was called upon to rid the earth of this great monstrous beast. The combat with the bull was a very common ritual imposed upon a given candidate for kingship. This myth of Hercules' battle with the Cretan bull is apparently a version or retelling of the great battle between Achelous and Hercules. Another version of this story might be found within the myth of Theseus and the Minotaur. Both stories were commonly read as part of the royal marriage ceremony. Hercules sought Deianira's hand in marriage, but to win her hand, he was required to defeat the immortal Achelous. Now, Achelous corresponds to the Scandinavian Loki, as he was able to transform himself into various shapes and sizes that included the bull-headed man, and the speckled serpent. At first, Achelous appeared before Hercules in the form of the speckled serpent, but this merely brought out laughter from the mouth of Hercules. He looked in the face of the speckled serpent and recalled how that in his cradle he had strangled serpents and had overcome them. Amazed at his fearlessness, Achelous transformed himself into a great white reem bull and charged directly at Hercules. In the Bible, the reem is that creature called the unicorn, as one of his horns is broken off. Will the unicorn be willing to serve thee, or abide by thy crib? Canst thou bind the unicorn with his band in the furrow, or will he harrow the valleys after thee? Hercules responded quickly, grabbing the horns of the reem and wrestling him down to the ground. In the struggle, Hercules broke the horn of his great pride and power from off the beast, showing that he had triumphed. The broken horn was then presented to the girl's father, Oeneus, as a bridal gift, which was, of course, the common bridal custom. The horn of the unicorn, reem, became the oriental symbol for great power, might, and strength when worn upon the champion's head as a royal crown. It should be noted here that Oeneus was not the girl's true father, for it is said that Dionysus was her true father. The link to Dionysus connects this myth of Hercules to the myth of Theseus. The horn of the unicorn eventually became an oriental symbol for great strength and power. But my horn shalt thou exalt like the horn of an unicorn. I shall be anointed with fresh oil. Some have suggested that Cronus is the first person to have worn such a horn as his royal crown. The name Cronus means the horned one. It has been suggested that this custom might well be the origin of the familiar image of the devil as having two horns upon his head. The biblical Satan is never depicted as having two horns, but instead is imagined as having 7 horns upon his 7 heads. While this is true, the false prophet, who is the dragon's great mouthpiece and miracle worker upon the earth, is described as having these 2 familiar horns. And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. Will the unicorn be willing to serve thee, or abide by thy crib? Canst thou bind the unicorn with his band in the furrow, or will he harrow the valleys after thee? But my horn shalt thou exalt like the horn of an unicorn. I shall be anointed with fresh oil. The Assyrian kings are commonly represented as wearing a great horn of a reem upon their head. It is believed that the custom of wearing the horn eventually lead to the wearing of a crown. The myth of Hercules battling the bull is repeated in the Epic of Gilgamesh, as he also seizes the bull by the horns and overcomes it. Again, we discover that the Persian god Mithra likewise will battle the great bull and finally subdue him. This demonstrates how these myths are somewhat interwoven into one fabric, so to speak. The story of Theseus is just another cloth sewn on to the fabric of the rest of these great myths, which we now understand to be prophetic utterances verses describing that same Messiah who is to come forth into all the world. Mythologists everywhere understand and teach that the act of Theseus entering into the labyrinth of the Minotaur is merely a representation of the sun god descending into Tartarus, the prison under the earth, to defeat the greatest of all enemies. We can immediately recognize that this prophecy is merely a shadow of Jesus Christ descending into the lower parts of the earth, only to rise again as the sun god, triumphing over darkness and death. So likewise does Theseus triumph victoriously over the Minotaur. For Christ also hath once suffered for sins, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but quickened by the Spirit, by which also he went and preached unto the spirits in prison, which sometime were disobedient, when once the long suffering of God waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was a preparing, wherein few, that is, 8 souls, were saved by water. The like figure whereunto even baptism doth also now save us, not the putting away of the filth of the flesh, but the answer of a good conscience toward God by the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who is gone into heaven and is on the right hand of God, angels and authorities and powers being made subject unto him. The reemergence of Theseus from the labyrinth described the death and resurrection of Dionysus, rising up from the underworld in victory. The horn or crown that he possesses in the myth is the very crown that we have represented within the constellation Corona. We can easily see by this 7th labor that Hercules can be identified as representing the same persons as Gilgamesh, Mithra, and Orion. The 8th prophecy demanded that Hercules was to capture, dominate, and then release